This is the last time anyone ever saw Sherry Lee Prather, and 1 month later, that's how her remains were discovered. And 4 years later, this is her killer, Johnny Wayne Johnson.
Can I go home?
No, you cannot.
Why is that?
Because I'm charging you with murder.
I didn't do murder.
Well, I'm charging you with it, and we can prove it, Johnny.
No, you cannot, because I didn't do it.
Okay.
Bashing his head against a wall because no one could have predicted how the hunt for this killer would end. November 2012. A search team is searching through a stretch of rural woodland on the outskirts of Jacksonville, Florida. They're not responding to a crime in progress. They're looking for a person, 43-year-old Sherry Lee Prather. And suddenly, the cadaver dogs find something. Bone fragments first, scattered through the leaves, the kind of thing that could be an animal. Investigators keep moving, and then the dogs find what they came for. Clothing, jewelry, a shoe. And beneath the undergrowth, human skeletal remains, very clearly done by another man. And for 30 days before this moment, while she lay in these woods, her family had been driving through some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Jacksonville in the middle of the night, knocking on doors, posting flyers on telephone poles, begging anyone who would listen to help them find her. Sherry had gone out the Friday night before, October 12, 2012, to a bar called Boots and Bottles Tavern, a biker dive on the north side of Jacksonville. Regulars, pool tables, the kind of bar with a gravitational pull for people who want a night that doesn't ask too many questions. Norma Ellis, Sherry's mom, knew something was wrong, and she tried to take action almost immediately. The night before, Norma and Sherry's daughter Mandy had driven there themselves. They said their goodbyes at the curb, the way families do when they fully expect to see each other again in a few hours. Sherry walked inside. Norma and Mandy drove home. And the night passed. No call. By morning, Norma had already made her decision. She and Mandy drove to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office to report Sherry missing. The officers said no. Sherry was a grown woman. She had a history of going out on weekends. There was no sign of a crime. She'd probably turn up by afternoon. Norma pushed until they took the case. It was the first of many times she would have to fight just to keep her daughter from being forgotten. 3 days after Sherry vanished, Sergeant Jay Farhat of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office began working the case. He spoke with the owner of Boots and Bottles, collected names, regulars who were there that Friday night. Several of them had known ties to a motorcycle club that was already drawing attention from federal investigators. A group connected, according to law enforcement, to drug trafficking and worse. Detectives searched the bar for any physical evidence, any surveillance footage, anything that placed Sherry there and showed what happened next. Boots and Bottles had no security cameras. Some witnesses said they saw Sherry that night, said she was having a good time, said she left on her own around closing. But when investigators turned to the motorcycle club members for anything more specific, the wall went up. Assistant Florida State Attorney Dan Skinner put it plainly that the gangs would never talk to the police there. And just like that, Sherry's fate was almost sealed. 30 days into the investigation, the case was already stalling. But Norma Ellis had not slowed down for a single hour. She and Mandy had been driving through the neighborhoods that Dan Skinner would later say genuinely scared him. Not quickly, not with windows up. They were stopping. Knocking, going into what Mandy called bad houses, posting flyers on every surface that would hold one. Sergeant Farhat pulled Norma aside at one point, begged her to stand down, told her it was dangerous out there, that investigators hadn't forgotten Sherry, that they were doing everything they could. "I vividly remember begging with her to please stand down," he recalled, reassuring her that we were doing everything we can and that we weren't forgetting her case. Norma listened, and then she kept going. Then, 30 days in, a phone call came into the tip line. Think about that. 30 days. The family is out there running their own search because the system has hit a wall. This case is about more than one woman. It's about what happens to families when the answer isn't fast enough. To understand the hunt, you need to understand who they were hunting for. Sherry Lee Prather was born on December 28, 1968 in Jacksonville, Florida, a city she never left, not because she couldn't, but because her roots ran deep and her people were there. Her family described her as wild-spirited, and they meant it as a compliment. She loved Harley-Davidsons. She loved a good karaoke night. And her mother, Norma, said she had a voice that sounded just like Stevie Nicks. She had had a hard stretch in her younger years, a short marriage in her 20s, 2 daughters, Mandy and her younger sister, relationships that turned too violent, a period of addiction that Mandy would later describe as Sherry's biggest battle. But Sherry fought her way out. By 30, she had gotten sober, and she stayed that way. She moved back in with her mother, helped raise her girls, still went out on Friday nights, still found her fun, but always let Norma know when she was home, always checked in, always called. Norma didn't consider Sherry her daughter. For her, she was her eternal best friend. On the night of October 12, 2012, Norma and Mandy dropped Sherry at Boots and Bottles, said their goodbyes at the curb. That was the last time anyone who loved her saw Sherry Prather alive. 30 days into the investigation, a young woman called the tip line. She was a childhood friend of Mandy Houston's, and she had been sitting on something. She told investigators about a man she called Uncle Jack, a regular at Boots and Bottles. She said that when news coverage of Sherry's disappearance came on his television, Uncle Jack had reacted. Said he'd heard something, heard that a woman's body had been dumped out on Braddock Road. Investigators couldn't locate Uncle Jack, but the tip was too specific to ignore. They sent a search team to Braddock Road. Bone fragments came first, mostly animals. Florida wilderness is dense and indiscriminate. But then the cadaver dogs found what they were trained to find: clothing, jewelry, shoes, and beneath the leaves and roots, human skeletal remains. A medical examiner compared the skeleton with pre-existing x-rays on file for Sherry Prather. It was confirmed. And then the forensic anthropologist delivered a finding that changed the entire shape of the investigation. Sherry had been shot in the spine. This wasn't a missing persons case anymore. Someone had shot Sherry Prather, dragged her body deep into those woods off Braddock Road, and walked away. Whoever killed her had bet that the Florida wilderness would do the rest. They almost won that bet. Investigators returned to Boots and Bottles, but this time they expanded their search to the surrounding strip mall, and what they found there changed everything. A cell phone store, sitting right next door to the bar, with a security camera mounted above its entrance, pointed directly at the parking lot shared by both businesses. The footage was clear. Sherry Prather walking out of Boots and Bottles, moving across the parking lot toward a man sitting beside a motorcycle. She reaches him, they exchange words, and then Sherry gets on the back of the motorcycle. They leave together. That man, whoever he was the last known person to see Sherry Prather alive. Nobody knew his name. JSO released the footage to the public. The tips began coming in. That man, whoever he was the last known person to see Sherry Prather alive. Among the calls that came in was one from a woman named Samantha Johnson. She identified herself as the estranged wife of a man named Johnny Wayne Johnson. Samantha told detectives that Johnson had confessed to her, in detail. He had told her he had taken Sherry near Trout River Boulevard and Braddock Road. He said he didn't have enough time to move the body properly, so he dragged her into the woods and left her there. Investigators tracked Johnson down. He agreed to talk, which, looking back, tells you something about how confident he was. He'd said he'd dropped Sherry at a friend's house that night, said she was fine when he left her. Detectives went to that house. The homeowners had never heard of Johnny Wayne Johnson, had never heard of Sherry Prather. As Sergeant Farhat put it, That simply didn't occur. Johnson was lying, but the case against him wasn't there yet. Samantha's account alone wasn't enough. Investigators needed more. Samantha agreed to wear a wire. She spent time near Johnson, listening, hoping to catch something that could be useful. Months passed. Johnson said nothing about Sherry on tape. A second woman was pulled into the investigation, a woman named Jordan, someone Johnson had been close to around the time of the murder. Samantha claimed Jordan had helped dispose of the body. Detectives interviewed Jordan. She denied everything. A search of her car turned up nothing useful. As time went on, inconsistencies began to appear in Samantha's account. No charges were filed. 4 years. Norma Ellis spent 4 years knowing in her gut who took her daughter and watching the evidence fall just short. There were no words to describe the kind of pain this must have been for the family. In 2016, a man named Mike Carroll made a decision he'd been putting off for 4 years. He picked up the phone. Carroll hadn't come forward before for one reason. He was afraid of Johnny Wayne Johnson, scared enough not to call the police for 4 years. But in the shocking light of this new information, Carroll told detectives that Johnny had called Carroll at approximately 4 a.m. the night of Sherry's disappearance. ASA Dan Skinner described what Carroll told investigators. Johnny Wayne Johnson told him he messed up and he needed some help cleaning something up. He told him he had dumped Sherry in the woods. He wanted help in finding ways to hide the remains. Carroll had refused to help and spent 4 years debating if he should do the right thing. On November 18, 2016, Johnny Wayne Johnson sat across from detectives inside the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. But Johnny was not new to this game. As he sat in the interrogation room, it was clear that he had done this before. He was confident. And then he denied everything. He swore on his father's grave that he had nothing to do with what happened to Sherry Prather. Statement after statement, denial after denial. ASA Skinner would later call it, without a trace of exaggeration, a multitude of denial. And then, at a certain point in that interview, the detective stood up and walked out, left Johnny alone in the room. What happened next, according to the police evidence record, is that Johnny began banging his head against the table, violently, repeatedly, until he was on the floor. After medical clearance, Johnny was placed under arrest, charged with the murder of Sherry Lee Prather. A motive was never established for what happened that night. No one, not investigators, not prosecutors, not Sherry's family, ever learned why Johnny Wayne Johnson put her on that motorcycle. He eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison. That's the scary part. Some people kill for no reason. Any random person could become a target for an absolute absurd reason. 4 years. That's how long the hunt lasted from the morning Norma Ellis drove to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and was turned away, to the morning she learned that the man who took her daughter was finally in handcuffs. 4 years of Norma deciding every single day to keep going, to keep posting flyers, to keep driving through dangerous neighborhoods, to keep calling, to keep being the person who would not allow her daughter to become a footnote in a filing cabinet. After his arrest in November 2016, Johnny Wayne Johnson sat in the Duval County Jail for over a year, still denying, still shifting, still the same man who had spent 4 years counting on people's silence. On March 12, 2018, nearly 6 years after Sherry Prather was shot and left in those woods off Braddock Road, Johnny Wayne Johnson stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 20.5 years in prison. A motive was never formally established in court, but prosecutors believed Johnson had made unwanted sexual advances toward Sherry that night, and that when she refused him, he shot her. No confirmation, no admission, just a theory that fits the shape of what happened and will never be anything more than that. One more detail that didn't make many headlines at the time, and should have: Johnny Wayne Johnson also goes by another name. His full legal name is Magni Buvar Forvatson. He holds dual Icelandic and American citizenship and reportedly spoke with a deliberately fake Icelandic accent around the Jacksonville biker community, the kind of affectation that makes a person memorable or makes them a myth, known in certain circles as the Viking. The man who built a reputation on being feared, who counted on a community too afraid to speak, who spent 4 years walking free in Jacksonville while Sherry's family drove through dangerous neighborhoods at night, posting her face on telephone poles. He pleaded guilty, and he is serving his time. As of May 2026, Johnny Wayne Johnson, Magni Buvar Forvatson, remains incarcerated in the Florida State Prison System. His projected release date sits somewhere around 2035, depending on the facility he is currently housed in. He will be in his 60s when he walks out. Sherry Prather was 43 when he took everything from her. She never got the chance to be older. Norma Ellis, the woman who drove through dangerous neighborhoods at midnight, who begged the sheriff's office to open a case, who refused every single time someone told her to stand down, found the peace she had promised her daughter she would find. After the sentencing in 2018, she went to the site on Braddock Road where Sherry's remains had been found. She stood there, and she said goodbye. She told her daughter it was okay to go, told her they were going to be all right, told her how much she was loved. Mandy Houston, Sherry's daughter, who grew up watching her mother fight and then watched her grandmother fight even harder, is still in Jacksonville, still living, still carrying the weight of a Friday night in October 2012 that changed everything. In her own words, she remembers her mother's ambition, her fight, the fact that Sherry Lee Prather never gave up. Sherry's second daughter, Brittany Gonzalez, was also left behind that night, another daughter who grew up without her mother because of what one man decided to do in the dark. The Justice for Sherry Facebook page, created by the family in the years when the case was cold and hope was the only currency they had, still exists, a memorial. A reminder that the fight happened, that it mattered, that people refused to let her name die. Sherry Lee Prather was a mother, a daughter, a woman with a voice like Stevie Nicks, who got sober, built a life, and was taken from it on a Friday night in October, and left in the woods off Braddock Road like she didn't matter. She mattered. She always mattered. If you made it to the end of this one, thank you for being here for Sherry's story. The reason cases like this stay with us is simple. The system almost didn't move. Without Norma Ellis making herself impossible to ignore, without a mother and a grandmother driving through places no one should ever have to drive through, this case might have stayed in the filing cabinet. The bones on Braddock Road might still be there.